The way that I've gained podcast success is it's all about the guest and the audience. And if you get caught up in talking about yourself too much and not being in line and not having the intended mindset, you're just going to lose.
That is Mark Metry, who started a YouTube channel when he was 13 years old that gained 35,000 subscribers, and who started a company when he was 15 that generated 6 figures of income while he was in high school and became the #1 Minecraft server in the world. Just a couple of side projects. Mark, now 21, runs a marketing agency and also happens to host a top 100 podcast, Humans 2.0, whose guests have included some of my heroes, such as Seth Godin. To learn more about Mark, you can search for Humans 2.0 or visit his website, markmetry.com, and that's MarkMetry, and a link's in the show notes. To make sure that you don't miss an episode of Unleashed, you can sign up for our weekly email at umbrex.com/unleashed. While there, you can also record and submit a question that I will try my best to answer in a future episode of this show. Thanks for listening. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will.
So, Mark, 2 years ago, you started a podcast, and you have had, at the age of 20, and you've had some amazing luminaries, some of my heroes on the shows, Seth Godin, Gretchen Rubin, a range of incredible people. Talk to me about how you got started with the podcast and how you've reached out to folks, leaders in their fields, and convinced them to come on your show.
I had always been aware of the term podcasting, and in my own life, 2015, 2016, I sort of entered this very interesting phase of my life where I sort of hit this depression. I was over 200 pounds, and I really just became conscious of a lot of the things that I was trying to run away from. And, when that happened, it pushed me into sort of, building a next better version of myself. There's that quote that, breakdowns lead to breakthroughs, and setbacks are actually just setups for, a better future. And so I was kind of going through that, and, I had started a business. I had, started to live the life that I actually wanted to live. And for anyone that is also on that journey, it's very rewarding, yes, but it's very, very challenging. And so in 2017, in the middle of it, I kind of hit like this sort of rut where I didn't really know what to do with my business. I didn't really, I was stuck on a few things. I was kind of running into the same, mistakes and errors again and again. And I didn't really have the answers. And so I just figured, if I had been listening to podcasts for my own self-growth, people like Tim Ferriss, Lewis Howes, Tom Bilyeu, Gary Vaynerchuk, then, maybe I can start my own podcast, not, to brand me or to build my influence, although those have been amazing side effects, but just as a sort of intuitive and interactive learning platform for me to learn. Because, at a young age, I've learned that one of the best ways to learn anything is to have a direct conversation with somebody that is actually doing it. Not a theorist, not somebody that just talks or writes about it, but somebody that is actually doing it today. And they have, an abundance of experience. And so I figured if I can start this podcast to get me in front of these people, because I think podcasting is the most efficient way to do that, right? Because there's no way, Seth Godin would respond to some, 20, 21-year-old's email if I just asked for like 45 minutes of his time and I don't have anything to give him. And it's not the fact that, he's selfish. Seth is an amazing human being, but it's the fact that imagine how many emails he gets a day. And, in this sort of beginning social media world that we're just seeing unfold, a lot of us have sort of lost the etiquette. A lot of us are, not approaching people with sort of a giver's mentality, but we're trying to take. We're trying to say, hey, can you do this? Or can I ask this from you? We're trying to always grab stuff. But when you can potentially give something to somebody, like, obviously I didn't get these, luminaries that you talked about at the beginning right away. It took a long time. But it's like once you have that platform that you've built up and you have sort of attention that, you and your audience have that you can utilize to, help Seth Godin sell a book or more awareness to his brand. I mean, it just works. And it's like the second thing is like, there's more podcasts now than ever. And so, these people, like especially these luminaries, they can sniff out BS in like half a second. And if you send them some email about, oh, I have this show, I've been doing it for this, and we talk about these things and we have these guests, but you're just not being genuine with your show, they're just not going to respond back to you. And so a big factor that I've really been taking advantage of is, just sort of utilizing a little bit about my story and just saying like, yo, I'm like this young kid. I've done X, Y, Z. I've been through this, and I'm just like a 21-year-old kid out here just trying to learn. And so they, in my opinion, they really look up to that because I think they kind of see that, ambitious kind of young hustler mentality in themselves when, they were my age. And so that's how I've landed like unbelievable interviews. And man, you should see my upcoming guest list, man. It hasn't even started yet. I'm very excited.
That is awesome. Congratulations. Now, so your podcast, Humans 2.0, it's all about you really on this journey to explore and try to understand the best of, thinking from all sorts of fields. Tell me like some of the maybe highlights of lessons learned that you've picked up over the course of all these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. But, I want to go to something that, you said that, and we kind of talked about me starting my podcast and this podcast about my own journey. That is the intention and that's the way that I use it to today. But honestly, if you took a listen to my podcast, you probably wouldn't think that because, I've learned that, a lot of these people today that are starting podcasts, they're trying to brand themselves as experts or influencers, or they're trying to say, hey, come listen to my podcast and I'm going to get on all these guests, but, I'm really going to sort of be running my own show and I'm just going to get these people on to help my personal brand grow. And it's like, I hate that mentality because first off, it's not going to work. And second off, the way that I've gained podcast success is it's all about the guest and the audience. And if you get caught up in talking about yourself too much and not being in line and not having the intended mindset, you're just going to lose. And so for me, it's really, the podcast is really all about the people that are listening to it, all the humans. And, some of the most mind-blowing things that I've learned. I mean, it's a gigantic, list. It's a big, file of libraries that's running through my mind. But, honestly, one thing that sticks out is, so I interviewed this guy. His name is Naveen Jain. He's like this billionaire philanthropist. He has, he has the only space company in the world that is authorized to actually land on the moon other than like governments of nations. And, he's not only doing that, but he also has this healthcare company called Viome. And the reason why he started that is because his dad actually very, very recently passed away from pancreatic cancer. And, when he was going through the process with his dad of taking him to, the facilities, the laboratories, the hospitals, and, you've got to keep in mind, this guy basically has all the money in the world. So he can afford every kind of medical treatment and, nothing worked. And he just saw how inefficient and awful this kind of healthcare system is. And so he went out on this quest to be like, what can we actually do to help all the people out there that are suffering from chronic illnesses that are robbing them from their life? When they show up to the ER or they go to their doctor every month or whatever, and they have different sorts of symptoms and they give them this prescription drug for it. And then a year later, something else pops out. And it's just like what he actually found was, he actually ended up going to Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. It's part of the U.S. military government research facilities. And it's actually where the atomic bomb was invented. And so he went there And, since he's a billionaire, he saw this tool. I don't know the name of the tool, I forget, but basically this tool, the government, our government spent billions of dollars creating it in order to defend us against a bioterrorist attack. So, if you're living in a city and there's some kind of terrorist attack where they drop a chemical agent and, certain people get sick and, there's not a quarantine and they have to identify now who exactly is sick on a cell by cell basis, no matter what the kind of illness or sickness is. And so he saw that and he was like, wait, if they're finding out what can make people sick, I can use this, license it to help people that are actually sick in the healthcare system, like most of us. And then I can also reverse engineer it to get people to be healthy. And so he combines that technology alongside this other very, very fascinating piece of emerging science that, I think is going to be sort of like a flat earth moment for us humans. But they've actually found that, our human genome expresses about 20,000 human genes. And we also have this thing called the gut microbiome. And it is this very vast ecosystem of like bacteria, fungus, probiotics, prebiotics, yeasts, viruses that basically, if you actually look at it, we produce 20,000 human genes. They actually produce 2 to 20 million genes. And so if you actually, Google this, if you actually do the research on this, you can actually see a tremendous amount of diseases, illnesses that are all being linked back to the imbalance of the gut microbiome. So, I'm talking about things like autism, ADHD, depression, asthma, anxiety, insomnia, heart diseases, some kinds of cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, really just a wide variety of chronic illnesses. And, when they actually take a look at the research, they find that for the most part, two things cause our gut microbiome to go imbalance, which end up creating all these chronic illnesses. And here's the thing, even if you don't have a chronic illness, the impact of the gut microbiome could be the difference between how well you feel when you wake up to, are you getting brain fog in the middle of the day? If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business person, are you kind of like are you tanking down after lunch, or do you not have the ability to focus? And so they've actually found that there's two main reasons for this gut imbalance. And the first one is actually dietary allergies. So, everyone knows about like things like peanut allergies and things along that line. It's actually a lot more complex than we think. And people have all different sorts of allergies, even allergies to foods that we generally regard as healthy. So like some people out there in the world should not be eating broccoli, cauliflower, just kind of like the healthiest foods. And the other reason is stress. And so what Naveen has been able to do through like this company that I believe is going to fundamentally disrupt the healthcare system and just human performance in general is, he's been able to create the world's first functional microbiome test. I know some people have heard of like a gut microbiome test, but all the other tests out there are just incomplete. They don't actually provide you with the correct data. Like I know 23andMe has a food thing now, and it's incorrect. It can tell you some things about sort of just like the human genetics part, but there is no test out there except for Viome that actually has the ability to do all this stuff. And so I took this test, and it actually told me that I need to be completely avoiding almonds, which I was literally eating every single day because I thought they were healthy, oats, pistachios, lobster, and then even like some vegetables that I thought were healthy, which were, zucchini, spinach, beets, bell peppers, leeks, green beans. And I'm not trying to say that these foods are unhealthy. They can actually be really healthy for some people. And, they've actually found that between you and I, Will, and most other human beings listening, we have, our DNA is 99.99999% identical. But our microbiome only has a 5% similarity rate to the person sitting next to you. And so when Naveen told me about this and I took the test, and I started experiencing, a tremendous amount of, results. I started having more energy consistently throughout the day than I've ever had. And while, drinking less coffee and all those other stimulants that we use, I've had zero brain fog. My focus and my memory now is just like a laser. Whatever I aim it at is there until I move it. I've had tremendous benefits when it comes to my sleep. And so, when people ask me what's the best thing you've learned about this podcast, it's honestly been, I've had so many other guests, but it's honestly been Naveen and this Viome test that, gives the people that are not only experiencing things like anxiety and depression, like I experienced, all the way to people that may or may not have these things, but are just looking for just like a very, very natural way of just like eating and understanding what's right for them. And so they can, map out their efforts with the proper biological resources that their body now has to improve, today. This is not something I'm talking about that, is going to be available 5 years from now. I'm talking about today, like literally right now.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a story. And it's probably not something that you were expecting to learn when you started the podcast, which is sort of an example of the sort of serendipity from having conversations. Tell me a little bit about, you've done a really amazing job of kind of growing your listenership of the podcast, to quite a substantial audience. You've also done a really amazing job of growing your kind of engagement on LinkedIn. I think something like 20,000 people follow you on LinkedIn. Perhaps you've sort of applied some of the lessons from your own firm. I know you run a marketing practice. Tell me about what you've done to beyond just sort of putting the show out there. How have you grown the audience of your podcast? A lot of my listeners who, are consultants who create thought leadership would, I think, be interested in some of the lessons learned that you have of how to grow an audience.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, I'm 21 years old, but believe it or not, I've actually been doing this whole sort of marketing, branding, promotion stuff for actually a decade. I got on the internet when I was 11 years old, and I ended up actually starting my first six-figure business when I was 15 years old. And so one of the things that I ended up doing when I was like a super young kid was going on YouTube, and I'd record these YouTube videos. And this was at a time before, YouTube was YouTube. There was no such thing as like, watching videos on the internet. And like, whenever I told people, they would instantly say, "Oh, wait, dude, you put videos of yourself on the internet? Like, that's so weird." But yeah, everyone today is sort of doing it. And so I actually ended up having 35,000 subscribers at that time. And I actually ended up quitting because, one, I didn't realize how serious the opportunity was. And two, I just listened to the people outside of me. And so with that mental model being set in my mind, when I got in the podcast game, I actually saw the same exact thing happen. There were people that were in the podcast industry that were sort of doing it. Nobody was really taking it seriously. And when I started my podcast, people didn't really understand. Like, this is in 2017, so this isn't even that long time ago. People didn't really understand what it was. People didn't understand what I was doing. And, every day I would get a message from somebody saying like, "Yo, dude, I'm going to start my podcast. It's going to be on this, this, and that." And I would just be like, "Cool. Let me know how it goes. Let me know if I can help you with anything." And, those people, most of them never actually ended up starting podcasts. So the reason why I'm saying all of this is I think a really important factor is to understand how damn important podcasts are. I recently saw this LinkedIn original video article that was talking about the recent acquisition that Spotify made for something like $500 million to acquire a bunch of different podcasting platforms. And they were saying, podcasting within the next couple years is just going to be about $1 billion industry on its own, but it's going to generate billions and billions of dollars of revenue for other industries. And so with that being said, if you can take something seriously and really hit it hard when nobody else is doing it, you're actually going to realize that you're only competing with about just a handful of people. And so that is really what I did, Will. I saw this sort of mental model appear, in my head, and I saw the patterns of history, and I just said, I'm going to hit this really hard. And, the way that I actually did it is, so, in 2017, when I had started my podcast, I didn't take it seriously at all. I would record a guest like maybe once in a while. I wouldn't do any kind of prep or work. I just kind of do whatever, right? And so at the beginning of January 1st, 2018, I started to actually understand this whole mental model that I told you. And so I started to post more frequently because, the current sort of, industry advice for podcasts at that time, 2017, 2018, was, oh yeah, you just got to post once a week. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but what I'm saying is if you have the ambition to grow your podcast, you can't be posting once a week. And like the analogy that I'll make with that is like, we look at these other big podcasters like, Tim Ferriss and any other person that has a successful podcast that only posts once a week. And it's like, well, is your brand like really at the height of Tim Ferriss for you to be doing what he's doing? You've got to be doing more. And so when I started to figure that out, I started to put in more effort and I started to produce more podcasts. I started to make around like 3 to 5 a week. I really started hitting it hard. And I tell you the next sort of, evolution that I had that really began to take my podcast to the next level is I ended up, interviewing this guy on my podcast named Kyle Mogan. And, he used to be on Gary Vaynerchuk's content team. And I had him on the podcast. I interviewed him and, I put out the interview and that was that. That was kind of my normal procedure. And, we were talking and he was telling me, Mark, did you make any sort of kind of micro content, like any kind of like mini videos or, images or anything like that so I can put it up on my own page so my followers, my audience can, check out our conversation on your podcast? And I was like, no, I don't, like, I've never done that before. And so he kind of, walked me through and kind of told me like, dude, you got to start making this micro content as sort of a gateway magnet to get new listeners to grow out your audience. And so ever since he told me that, I was just kind of pursuing this micro content video game. And, the next thing was, I interviewed this guy named Quentin Allums. He's like one of the top creators on LinkedIn. And, I kind of saw his story of how he was a totally normal dude. And of course, he's still a normal dude today. He's not like Superman or anything. But, he kind of went from somebody that had negative $900 in his bank account to today, starting the fastest growing companies in his city. And I saw how he used LinkedIn a lot for that. And so, after I had him on my podcast, I started to implement the things that he told me about LinkedIn, on my own profile. And at first, it started off real slow. Like, I look back to it now and, some of my early videos would get like 2 likes or they get like, 3, 4 likes to 1 comment or something. And, today, obviously everything goes up and down, but I've had videos that, have hit well over, like 500,000 views. Whoa. And it's just like, yeah. And it's just like this, if even 0.001% of people are actually compelled enough to click the link to go to my podcast, that's still a massive amount of listeners. And it's like, when you asked me, how many downloads did your podcast get before we started recording? I to be honest with you, I don't really look because it's growing so fast because I'm putting out this content now at scale on LinkedIn, on Instagram. The people that are seeing it that I've had on as guests are commenting on it or they're posting it on their own page. And that's now growing my audience, not just to kind of like the organic LinkedIn stuff, but now to their audience. Now people who are interested in what Seth Godin have to say now subscribe to my podcast. And it's just like when you sort of run that and you do that for a long time, you basically create infinite opportunities that, you don't even know what to do with. And, reaching out to people like some of the greats that we talked about, it becomes infinitely more easy when you've been building this vehicle, this platform that, you've been building that is not only authentic and genuine. And honestly, I'd say those have been the main things for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. Tell us a little bit about this micro content. What does that look like, and how do you go about creating those?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you just, go to my Instagram or if you go to my LinkedIn, Mark Metry, you'll see what I'm talking about. But all it is, I'll take, like a compelling, 50 to 60-second clip of where my guest says something that I think is, really important, might be thought provoking, might, grab somebody's attention. And I'll simply take that clip and myself, or I'll have somebody on my team, create a nice graphic that, has a good headline that is also, thought provoking. Like I had on, JP Sears, very out there dude. He's got, like his videos went viral. I think they're called like ultra spiritual, or, he's being sarcastic, making fun of a bunch of stuff. I'm pretty sure those got over like 1 billion views. And like, just for an example, like the headline that I used for him was when we were kind of talking about fear and how you've got to use fear to your advantage. And the headline was, in big words, use fear like a compass. And then you put a picture of JP on there. And then, you use a kind of video software to then create sort of captions, live captions that move along his voice. And it's just like, if you do that enough times, you're going to win. Just make sure they are interesting, compelling, make sure they are authentic and genuine. This obviously depends on the person, but I guarantee you, if you make videos on LinkedIn today that are like, hey, dude, I run this marketing agency, and you check out these top 5 hacks for, marketing, I guarantee your video is just going to bomb, because everyone has a very, very busy day. And it's like, in my opinion, I genuinely think it is delusional for somebody to think that just because they have a podcast, like a 30, 40-minute episode or whatever it is, that, if you're just going to tweet it out, or if you're just going to go on your LinkedIn and say, hey guys, check out episode 20 with this guest, here's the link, bye. And you genuinely think people are going to click on your podcast and you're going to get new listeners, you're delusional. The matter of the fact is, the market has never been more congested. And if you're not doing this every single day, you're just not going to have a big podcast. And for me, that was one of my goals. So, yeah.
Very interesting. So taking pieces of it, and it's not even you're recording, video of your listeners, but it's taking some graphic, putting some voice on it, making it into a short 1-minute video, and then putting that on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn.
And there's many different versions, right? Like the videos are often what become the most popular. It could just be, you taking your phone. Like, let's say, you have 5 minutes before work or something and you don't necessarily have time. You can literally just pull out your phone and, record a video and say like, maybe start it off with like a quote. Like, let's say you just put out a podcast episode with Seth Godin, and you begin the video with a sort of quote that Seth Godin has. Like, for example, what is it? It's, you can't wait to be picked. You have to pick yourself. And you could just like talk just yourself in your face, like nothing special or fancy, just for like a minute or two on like what that actually means. And you can say, hey, if you guys found this interesting, you'll find the podcast way more interesting. And then you could also do like, an image of a quote with your guest in the background. You could also, there's a wide variety of different things that you can play around with it. You could, write an article like top 5 things I learned from Seth Godin. So it's really about, creating those pieces of micro content, like those little vehicles, to get people to be attracted to, the main podcast. And it comes in many different forms.
How have you grown your LinkedIn following? Do you kind of reach out to people, or is it when people kind of see one of your videos, they start following you? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So 99% of it is from the content, right? Because, when you make kind of like this digestible content that somebody can look at just like when they're scrolling on their phone, like on the subway or whatever for a minute, what you're really doing is you're like sending out a beacon, and that beacon has data and information of potentially people that are like-minded towards that kind of topic in the video, or maybe even yourself. And so, I've literally been posting on LinkedIn every single day since like February or March of last year of 2018. And it's like when you do that and you're just constantly sending out these beacons, that's how you really grow your following. Like that's really it. And the other thing that I would say is to be human. So many people now, are now utilizing social media for whatever, their brand. They're trying to grow their podcast. They're trying to sell something as a part of their company that they have a job at, whatever. And it's like, I think a lot of us have lost, or maybe just need to be reminded of what it actually means to be human on social media. And it's not that social media is bad. It's just that I think maybe these kinds of platforms are really new, and maybe we haven't developed a kind of etiquette for it. And it's like this, I open up my LinkedIn right now and I get, I see 50 messages of people that are sending me, various things from, hey Mark, that was a great video last night. I love that, right? Or like, hey Mark, I listened to this, or like I binged 10 episodes of your podcast, this, and that. I love all that. And then I'll get a message from somebody that says, oh, hey Mark, I'm an associate here, and I was just wondering if you wanted to, I don't know, grab a virtual cup of coffee with me or anything like that. And my instant reaction is, I get about 150 of those every single day. And it's like, first off, who are you? Like, I don't even know who you are, but you are reaching out to me. From my experience, not always, those people that kind of just send out those quick kinds of messages are just looking for quick hits. They're looking for quick successes, whether it's, a prospecting call or something like that. I'm not trying to paint the image that everyone is just out there in it for themselves on social media. But it's like when you can, going back to the beginning of this conversation, when you can genuinely just be a giver of information, of connecting somebody, of introducing somebody else to somebody else, that is how you truly become a human on LinkedIn. And if you embrace those values of just being a normal human and just like pretending that, you wouldn't send a LinkedIn message or you wouldn't write a LinkedIn post to something that you wouldn't say to somebody in real life. Like you wouldn't walk up to a random person and be like, hey, check out my podcast, or like, hey, buy this from me. It's just like, it's not human. And so I think if you, like, all the people that I've talked to that have built crazy followings on LinkedIn, nothing, my following is nothing compared to them. They've all told me the same thing. It's all about being a human and then finding a way to scale that in a very genuine, authentic way that doesn't dilute from that. So making content of either your guests where you're actively educating people, or maybe it's something that you learned, and just being human. I think those are the main keys to success on LinkedIn, and just doing it every day.
I got to go back and ask you about the business that you started when you were 15.
Yeah. Honestly, when I look back at that, I'm just like, wait, I did that? So the YouTube channel that I had told you about, that was all centered around video games. That was the kind of kid that I was growing up. I was just really into video games. And when I was 15, one of my friends, he was like, hey man, have you heard of this video game called Minecraft? And, I said, oh yeah, of course I've heard of it. Minecraft is, one of the biggest games out there for, people that are under the age of 18. And I was like, nah, man, that's a stupid game. But eventually, after him hitting me up again and again, eventually, I ended up playing the game. And, when I played it, we played it with like these online servers. So like we'd Google, Minecraft multiplayer servers. These were, big computers that hosted these multiplayer servers where you could just join in, with your friends, and you guys can play together with like different kinds of game modes. And, we joined a server like the first day of me playing this game. And, this server was, really laggy, didn't have good connection. It honestly just wasn't fun. Like the game modes on there sucked. And so the next day, I literally, ended up starting my own Minecraft server. I just ended up Googling it. I didn't have any clue what I was doing at the time. And so, to keep the story short, through just sort of, having fun and not really setting out there with like, oh, I'm going to start this with a business plan and hit revenue here. I just started it with like $15 and it became the world's #1 Minecraft server in like 7, 8 months. And it became generating, ridiculous amount, like 6 figures with like a 99% profit margin. Eventually ended up having a staff. Our overall, website was getting hit up about like 10 million times. Kind of like our registered members on our premium members that we're paying was in the tens of thousands. And it was just like a miraculous time in my life. And it, ultimately taught me about this whole internet thing and how you can be somebody without any kind of money, without any connections, without a network, and you can do something and you can, genuinely just start something if you want to have fun with your friends and make a living out of that. And so, there's a really interesting time for sure in my life.
So, so how did your Minecraft server become the #1 in the world? What were you doing differently that led to such success?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. So, looking back at it now, it was like all very, very intuitive. Like a lot of the things that we talk about today, like content marketing and like community marketing and like outreach and SEO and all those words, I was just like doing those just like intuitively. And I had like, to be honest with you, I didn't even know what the word marketing was until I had turned like 18. Honestly, the way that I answer that, the best way is, this was a community for me. I don't know if we talked about this, but I had a lot of social anxiety growing up. I didn't have too many friends. And so this was sort of like where I would go to talk to people that may or may not have been in a similar situation in real life as me. And so when you approach it from that lens, it's not really about like the different kinds of marketing tactics and growth hacks, but it's really just like, how can I make this a good enough place where people will join every single day and then tell the people they love the most about that. And honestly, I've carried that same philosophy with everything else that I've done. And if you can really ingrain the community in what it is that you're doing, you're going to win. And I just think you need to have the best intentions in mind. And so I think that's the best answer I could give you.
That's amazing. Tell us a little bit about your marketing firm.
Our only clients are actually in the immersive technologies industry. So things like virtual reality, augmented mixed reality. And, we're actually planning on, starting to develop software in those various kinds of technology fields. And, we're now branching out into podcasting just because, it's a crazy, crazy market. We're working with the Fortune 500 today and some other individuals and, gotten some crazy results, built, top 10 podcasts for people in their niche. And so the marketing agency for me, man, to be honest with you, is just sort of like my treadmill. It is the way in which I run every day, experiment, learn from, because, I know I'm going to look back 10 years from now and, with the abundance of this kind of marketing, quote unquote, which I really think that marketing is just kind of like the inner plumbings of how this world's communication actually runs. And I've learned that communication is of the utmost importance to me. And, I want to be pushing out ideas and messages of value and not just about, silly, mundane, trivial things. And so that is going to require me to have the utmost amount of knowledge and wisdom and practical application of this whole marketing communications thing for everything else that I'm going to do in my life. And so, it's a very sort of, boutique agency, so to speak, that only works with a lot of, select people that we think we can help. But yeah, I mean, that's really the best way that I can describe it. And, for me, I sort of built this marketing agency when I was coming out of this, bad time in my life. And it was really the initiation of a conquest that I had started to, kind of discover myself and, build that human version 2.0 that's inside of me.
Now, you mentioned that you're 21. Some listeners might be wondering if you graduated from college, attended college. Tell us a little bit about that, and if not, tell us about the decision process for you.
Yeah, and so for me, I came from an immigrant family that has a very high standard on education, and you know, like I remember my parents made me promise them to graduate college when I was like in high school because they had started to kind of see what I was doing, the wealth that I had been creating, and making making an income of people that would be graduating from college and maybe would get like 5 years or 10 years out. And so I kind of promised them, and honestly, I'm in college and on a break, but the reason is I've just gotten really busy and I'll see how it is. But college is definitely something that I plan to complete. And although it may not exactly be an amazing like business proposition model for some people, like go to college for a year, spend $40,000, and if it's not a good college, like learn from professors that have no idea what they're talking about, that might not necessarily be a great idea. But I mean, listen, I think if you have the money, if you don't know what to do with your life, and you go to a good college, and what I mean by good college is there's other smart people around you. I think it's all about sort of spreading those different kinds of ideas and learning amongst each other, because you in 10 years you're really going to have no idea. 10, 20 years you're really going to have no idea who, maybe that kid that you sat in class with is going to be like the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. And so I just think it's something for everyone to sort of explore on their own and kind of look at the pros and cons. But, I definitely would not be where I am if I didn't have the exposure of college for sure. And that's not necessarily to like give props to my college, but it's just like, I think people need to get out of their environment, no matter what kind of environment it is, and just sort of switch, differentiate, become immersed in a different environment. And you'd be surprised to see what happens.
Beyond changing the diet, is there anything else that you've learned through the process of your podcast interviews that you have gone and implemented in your own life?
Yeah, so I think that diet is definitely massive. The nutrition, like we talked about. I would say honestly, the next sort of best thing is sleep. The studies are now showing that your body basically heals itself when you're sleeping. In my opinion, sleep is actually, for some people, could have the potential to be more important than the food, than the diet. And I think for me, when I first started my entrepreneurial journey, I was like, hey, I'm gonna sleep for 6.5 hours or something like that. But by the time I actually fell asleep, it would be more or less something like 6 hours, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. And honestly, I think that's not really acceptable. And it's if you actually look at the science, and people can Google this, unless you are a human being that has this unbelievably rare genetic disposition, and by rare I mean it's like in like the 0.00000000001% of humans, those people can actually like sleep for 4 hours and their body can process totally fine. I wish I had that. But for most of us, the actual scientific number, and I've had various sleep experts come on my show, it's 7.5 hours plus or minus 30 minutes. So anywhere from 7 to 8 hours is what your body requires for you to be able to fully function the next day. I've learned for me, it's, more around 7, but you get there and you sort of fine tune it with the other things that you do. If you find a good coping stress mechanism like meditation or yoga or journaling, or doing 1,000 other healthy coping stress mechanisms, that's going to help out your sleep. If you have a good diet and you're exercising, that's also going to help out your sleep. But for example, Olympic athletes, they need to be sleeping like 10 hours a day because their body needs to rebuild the muscle, and we know that happens, or a big part of that process happens while you are asleep. And so the biggest thing is I would say, make sure you are quality sleeping well enough. That doesn't mean waking up in the middle of the night. That doesn't mean, checking your phone right before you go to bed. That doesn't mean just sleeping with the TV on. It thinks that. And if I could go on like a little bit of a tangent, I know we have to go, but I would suggest people to try out hypnotherapy. It sounds weird, but just Google it. Basically, all it is you put in headphones when you go to sleep, and it's an audio track of some kind of information, details, right? Because, when you're asleep, your brain falls into the subconscious eventually. And that's actually, the subconscious dictates like 90%, 95% of your behavior throughout the conscious day. And you can't actually access the subconscious during the conscious day. So the only way to do it is during sleep. And so if you can put on a good track, a good kind of audio tape, you can just totally rewire your mindset within like a couple weeks and not kind of have this baggage underneath. So I think those two are really, really important for sure.
Wow. Well, Mark, that is a ton of stuff to consider. What an amazing career you've had already, building an incredible business at the age of 15, and a really great podcast. What is the best place for people to go online and find out more about you?
Yeah, so I mean, just Google my name, Mark Metry, MarkMetry. I'm the most active on probably LinkedIn and Instagram. But if you definitely want to get in touch with me and more than likely or not receive a response, just shoot me an email. It's mark@vudream.com, and I'll be sure to get back to you.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, Will. This was fantastic.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.